The desert wind scraped across San Pedro Valley like a rasp against bone. Under the noon blaze, the earth shimmered white, cracked and cruel. A woman moved there, small against the emptiness, dragging a beam heavier than her own body toward a half-built cabin frame. Each step left a print that filled with dust before the next began. Sweat streaked her face, but her jaw held steady. From the ridge above, Gareth Vance reined in his horse. The heat bent the horizon, and through it he watched her fight the wind, fight the weight, fight something he couldn't yet name. 2 summers had passed since he buried Mary Ellen, but grief had turned him hollow, not gentle. And yet the sight of that woman refusing to yield struck through the numbness like a blade drawn from the forge. He didn't know her name, but he knew the sound of courage when he saw it, by late afternoon. The sun sank lower, but the valley still burned. Heat rippled off the red earth, carrying the dry scent of mesquite and the faint bitterness of smoke from a far-off brush fire. San Pedro Valley stretched wide and wild, no fences yet, no mercy either. Cattle trails carved into the dust. Yucca leaves rattled like bones, and the wind spoke in the language of grit. Beyond the willow thickets, a narrow creek shimmered, its surface thin as glass. There, Clara Hollis swung her hammer with the rhythm of someone who had no one left to count on. She was no stranger to calluses or solitude. Beneath the brim of her faded hat, strands of sun-bleached hair clung to her temples, and her eyes pale gray. Steady seemed carved from the same stone she stood upon once. She'd been the wife of Ben Hollis, a ranch hand killed in a land dispute that left her burdened with debts and a reputation she hadn't earned. Folks in Willow Bend whispered her name with pity or suspicion, never respect. So she stopped going into town. Better to build something of her own hands than wait for a world that wouldn't lend her one. At the far ridge, Gareth Vance had made a habit of passing by. No one in Willow Bend knew why the owner of Silver Ridge Ranch rode that way each dawn. To most, Gareth was a man carved from silence, tall, broad-shouldered, face set in the calm of someone long used to loss. 2 years earlier, fever had taken Mary Ellen, his wife, and the child she'd carried. He'd buried them under a cottonwood tree and spoke to no one since. The ranch ran on routine water, cattle, trade, and the old foreman, Silas Boone, was the only one who dared break his quiet that morning. As Gareth rode the ridge, the light caught on the silver clasp of a small locket tied to his saddle horn. Inside it, a photo fading to ghost gray. He touched it once, then let his hand fall. From where he sat, he could see Clara kneeling by her unfinished wall, hammering nails with precision, lips moving as if counting each strike. No man had stepped forward to help her. No neighbor had even stopped by. Still she worked. Still she built. The sheer defiance of it stirred something in him, a memory. Maybe. Or a hunger that wasn't hunger at all. When the wind picked up again, he turned his horse toward the ridge trail, but halfway up, he stopped. Her hammer still echoed faintly through the valley, steady, deliberate, and alive. And Gareth realized he'd been listening for that sound every day. The first storm of summer rolled in without warning. Clouds gathered over the Dragon Mountains, swallowing the sun in a single breath. The wind howled through the valley, dragging sand and the scent of ozone. At Hollis Creek, Clara cursed under her breath as the canvas roof she'd stretched over the cabin frame whipped loose from its pegs. She leapt to catch a corner before it tore away completely. A shadow fell over her. Hoofbeats, a horse pushing through the dust. Winds turning, a man's voice said behind her, deep, calm, as if this chaos were a mere inconvenience. Clara spun, breath sharp, hammer raised. The stranger sat astride a chestnut mare, coat dark with dust, hat brim low against the wind. His presence felt heavy but not threatening, steady, like the land before a storm. "I don't need help," she said. "It's not help," he replied, swinging down from the saddle. "Just sense. You'll lose that roof in another gust." She hesitated, eyes narrowing as he began to untie a coil of rope from his saddlebag. The wind tore at the tarp again, and instinct overrode pride. "Fine. Tie the west corner," she shouted. They worked without another word, he anchoring knots, she hammering stakes into the hardpan. Sand bit their faces. Each time the wind surged, both leaned their weight into the ropes, hands brushing once, then pulling back. When at last the canvas held, the world fell into the kind of silence that follows exhaustion. Clara stepped back, chest rising with ragged breaths. The stranger wiped dust from his brow. He had the kind of face that looked built for solemnity, broad, lined, but not unkind. There was a tiredness in his eyes, though, like someone who'd run out of places to put his grief. "Appreciate the rope," she said curtly. "You can take it back now. Keep it," he answered. "Rope's replaceable, roofs aren't." He started toward his horse. Clara studied the way he moved, unhurried, precise, like a man who measured everything twice before speaking once. "You're from town?" she asked finally. "Silver Ridge Ranch," he said, tightening his saddle. "Name's Gareth Vance." Recognition flickered. She'd heard the name whispered in Willow Bend, a widower who barely spoke, who never smiled. "Clara Hollis," she said, out of formality more than courtesy. He nodded once, no hint of surprise. "Storm's not over," he murmured, glancing at the rolling sky. "You'll need to weight that tarp again after sundown. I'll manage. I know you will." His tone carried no doubt, no condescension, just fact. Then he swung onto his horse and started toward the ridge. For a moment, Clara wanted to call after him, to ask why he'd come, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she watched as he rode into the rising wind, a dark silhouette swallowed by dust. When the last echo of hoofbeats faded, she turned back to the cabin. Her hands trembled not from fear or fatigue, but from something she hadn't felt in years, the sense of being seen without being judged. That night, lightning flickered along the horizon. The valley glowed pale beneath it, and Clara stood by the window frame, watching the ridge. Far off, a tiny spark moved along the trail, a lantern swinging from a rider's saddle. For reasons she didn't yet understand, she hoped it was him. Morning came bright and merciless. The storm had stripped the land clean, leaving the air sharp with the scent of wet dust and creosote. Clara woke before sunrise, her arms sore, her palms raw, but the roof still held. When she stepped outside, she found a coil of new rope, a tin of nails, and a folded note pinned beneath a stone. For the rafters, GV. She frowned at the initials, half irritated, half grateful. "Presumptuous man," she muttered, but tucked the rope inside anyway. By noon, she heard hoofbeats again. Gareth Vance reined in by the corral and dismounted with the same quiet precision as before. "Needed a check," he said simply. "Storm might have loosened the north post. I checked it twice. Then we'll check a third." There was no argument in his tone, only calm insistence. She handed him a hammer, their fingers brushed, both pulling back like they'd touched a live wire. They worked side by side through the morning, reinforcing beams and cutting fresh notches into the pine logs. Gareth moved with the competence of a man who knew weight, leverage, and silence. He didn't speak unless necessary. Yet his presence felt steady, something that filled the empty air between them without demanding space. During a break, Clara poured water from a dented canteen and offered it across. For the man who refuses to leave people alone. He almost smiled. For the woman who keeps proving she doesn't need anyone. He drank, then set the canteen down gently. You notch too deep. Timber splits easier in this heat. She raised an eyebrow. So teach me better. If you're going to criticize. He took her hammer, knelt beside the beam, and demonstrated. Angle the chisel. Let the grain tell you what it wants. The grain tells me it's stubborn. That's because you're fighting it. Their eyes met briefly. The corner of his mouth lifted, faint but real. She didn't look away this time. When the sun hit its peak, the wind carried the faint hum of insects and distant cattle. They ate lunch in silence beneath the shade of the half-built porch. Gareth tore dried beef into strips while Clara sharpened her chisel. Your husband he billed before he asked quietly. No. Ben worked cattle. Her voice stayed flat, as if speaking facts, not memories. He died trying to defend land that wasn't worth dying for. The debt was. Apparently. I heard the town blamed him. They needed someone to blame. She shrugged. I inherited the shame and the land. One of them I can use. He nodded, eyes dark with recognition. Town's good at blame. When she glanced up, his gaze was distant beyond the horizon, beyond even grief. You lost someone too, she said softly. He didn't answer right away. The air tightened between them until the wind broke it. Mary Ellen, he said finally. Fever took her, took the child too. I thought if I worked long enough, it might feel like I'd earned the right to live without them. Clara's hand stilled. And did you? No, he said. But I stopped dying with them. For a while. Neither spoke. The sound of a hawk cut through the stillness. When Gareth rose to leave, Clara surprised herself by saying, Come tomorrow. There's roof work that needs 2 hands. He tipped his hat, the faintest trace of warmth in his eyes. I'll bring extra nails. Days slipped into a rhythm neither intended. Gareth arrived each morning before the heat grew unbearable. They worked in tandem, often without words, guided by instinct and shared purpose. She learned the small habits of him, the way he checked every rope twice, the quiet hum he made under his breath when measuring angles, how his jaw flexed when he thought. He learned hers, the soft curse she muttered when nails bent, the way she stood 1 pace back from the wall before driving the next stake, the focus that turned sweat and dust into something almost holy. When the sun set, he'd pack his tools and linger for a beat, like a man testing the air before leaving a room he'd grown to like. Once, as he mounted his horse, she asked, Why keep coming? Because you're building something worth standing near, he said, and rode off before she could reply. By the second week, the cabin had a frame, a roof half-shingled, and 2 hearts that no longer pretended not to listen for each other's footsteps. One evening, as the sky bruised into gold and violet, Clara sat on the porch step, rubbing resin from her fingers. Gareth lingered by the gate. You've built this faster than any man I've seen, he said. She smirked. Men talk more. He laughed short, surprised. The sound of someone remembering how. It startled them both, for the first time in years. Clara didn't feel alone on her land. He tipped his hat. Meaning to leave. Storm season's not over yet, he warned. She looked toward the horizon, where lightning flickered faintly. Then I guess we'll find out what holds. And as he rode away, neither of them realized that what they were testing wasn't the roof, but their own hearts. The peace didn't last. In towns like Willowbend, silence only bred gossip. By mid-July, whispers crawled through the saloon and church pews about the widower from Silver Ridge spending his days on a widow's land. Mrs. Prudence Pritchard spoke loudest, her voice thick with righteousness. "A woman who builds alone invites trouble," she declared, "and a man who forgets his vows invites shame." The words traveled faster than dust, until even Gareth's foreman, Silas Boone, brought them up one night over coffee. "People talk." "Boss," Silas warned. "Talk's cheap, but it buys ruin if you let it." Gareth said nothing. He just stared into the dark outside the window, where lightning flickered far off beyond the ridge. He told himself it didn't matter what anyone thought, but he also didn't ride out the next morning. At Hollis Creek, Clara waited. The hours stretched, heavy with heat and questions she didn't want to ask. When Gareth finally arrived 3 days later, the distance between them felt wider than the valley itself. "Busy week," he said. "Dismounting. Must have been." She went back to hammering, each strike harder than it needed to be. He took the other end of the beam. "Didn't figure you'd miss me. Then you don't know much about keeping promises," she snapped, then bit the words back. The air thickened between them. That night, the sound of thunder rolled closer. Clouds pressed low and dark, warning of the kind of storm desert men feared most, not rain, but lightning that lit the ground on fire. While Gareth checked the roof, Clara noticed the faint glint of water where there shouldn't be any at the lower end of her property, near the mounds of fresh dirt. Her stomach dropped. The mounds followed the line of her irrigation ditch. Someone had dammed the moon. "Dunley," she hissed. Gareth followed her gaze, jaw tightening. "Stay here. No." She grabbed a lantern and a shovel. "This is my land. I'll fix it." The two of them trudged through the darkness, wind ripping at their clothes. When they reached the ditch, the truth hit them. A barrier of stones and sandbags rerouted the creek straight into Dunley's pasture. The sabotage had already starved Clara's soil and weakened her foundations. They worked in the torchlight, tearing the blockage apart. Clara's shovel struck rock. Sparks flew. Gareth hauled stones, muscles straining. Thunder cracked overhead. "You should have gone to the sheriff first," he said through clenched teeth. "I'm done waiting for men to fight my battles. And if the next lightning bolt hits us, then at least I'll die on my own land." The words silenced him. He saw in her eyes the same fire that once burned in his wife's, uncompromising, alive. But this time, he didn't look away. When the dam finally broke, water surged through the trench, splashing their boots. Clara fell to her knees, panting, half laughing in relief. It's done. But nature wasn't finished. A flash split the sky, and a second later, the ridge behind them burst into flame. Lightning had struck the dry brush above her cabin. The fire caught the wind, spreading fast toward the valley floor. "Gareth, go." He pulled her up and they ran, the night roaring behind them. Sparks flew overhead like fiery insects. By the time they reached the cabin, the glow of fire painted everything in orange and blood. Gareth grabbed the water barrels while Clara tore a wet blanket from the line, smothering sparks that leapt onto the porch. "We can't save it all," he shouted. "Then we save what matters," she yelled back, voice raw. The fire raced down the ridge, devouring sage and grass, its heat punching the air like hammer blows. Gareth and Clara worked in frantic rhythm, hauling water, beating back embers, shouting through smoke. When her hair caught a spark, he threw his jacket over her shoulders without thinking. "Stay low," he barked. "You don't give orders here." Then call it advice. They fought until breath turned to fire. When the wind shifted, The blaze swung east toward the creek. Gareth looked up, eyes narrowing. If we cut it off there, it'll die out. It's too close. Trust me. He sprinted ahead, signaling with his arm. Clara hesitated only a second, then followed, grabbing the shovel. Together they dug a trench at the bank, wet sand sucking at their boots. The heat scalded their backs. Gareth's shirt smoldered at the edges. Clara, choking, flung the last mound of dirt into the line. Then, as suddenly as it began, the fire hit the water and hissed out. Steam rose in ghostly ribbons. The night went still except for their ragged breathing. For a long moment, neither moved. Gareth leaned on the shovel, sweat and soot streaking his face. Clara sank beside him, trembling, half from exhaustion, half from disbelief. "We stopped it," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "No, you stopped it." She looked at him, the firelight fading into stars overhead. "If you hadn't come back, I nearly didn't." His voice cracked like wood under strain. "I thought I'd protect your name by staying away. I only made you face hell alone. You think this was hell?" She gave a tired laugh. "Hell's when people decide you're guilty before you even speak. Tonight was living." He reached for her hand without thinking. She didn't pull away. Behind them, the flames smoldered into ash, painting the horizon the color of rebirth. They sat in silence until the wind cooled. For the first time in 2 years, Gareth felt something loosen in his chest, not relief, but release. Mary Ellen's face drifted through his mind, but without pain this time, only gratitude. Clara rose unsteadily, brushing ash from her skirt. "We'll need help rebuilding the fence line." He met her eyes, steady and sure. "Then we'll start at dawn, from the ridge above." Silas Boone and a handful of ranch hands appeared, drawn by the fire's glow. The old man lifted his hat. "Town's coming. Boss, they'll see what you two did." Gareth looked toward the valley, where a few lanterns already flickered in the darkness. "Good," he said quietly. It's time they saw something worth talking about. And as the first light touched the horizon, the smoke thinned, revealing the cabin still standing, scarred, but whole. Clara pressed her palm against the blackened wall, feeling its warmth. Still standing, she murmured. Gareth smiled, a slow, honest curve that felt like dawn itself. "Just like you, by sunrise." The fire had burned itself into memory. Smoke clung to the valley like a ghost reluctant to leave. Gareth and Clara stood outside the cabin, shoulders brushed with soot, hair matted, eyes red from exhaustion. Around them, the others from Willow Bend arrived, men leading wagons, women carrying buckets and blankets. No one spoke at first. The sight of the scorched hill and the two figures standing before it silenced every whisper that had haunted Clara's name. Silas Boone climbed off his horse, took in the half-burned ridge, then the cabin still upright behind them. "Damn fine work," he said simply. "Could have lost half the valley." Mrs. Pritchard arrived last, riding side saddle as if propriety could ward off guilt. Her gaze darted from the charred ground to Gareth's soot-streaked face. "You've stirred the town into chaos, Mr. Vance." A man of your stature, Gareth stepped forward, voice calm but steel-edged. "A man of my stature did what was right. You'd have let her burn." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Clara turned sharply to him, ready to stop the confrontation. But he went on. "Charles Dunley damned her water." Gareth continued, holding up a dirt-stained ledger. His hired hands bragged about it last night at the saloon. "I've got their names. And here," he handed a stack of folded papers to Deputy Frank McCall, who had ridden in behind the group. Receipts showing every debt Ben Hollis ever owed was cleared before his death. Mrs. Pritchard's lips parted, color draining from her cheeks. McCall skimmed the pages, then looked up. "It's all here," he confirmed. "Dunley's claims are fraud. Miss Hollis's land is lawful and occupied." "Mrs. Hollis," Gareth corrected softly. His eyes met Clara's. "The world needs reminding she still has that right." A murmur moved through the onlookers, some ashamed, others quietly relieved. The self-righteous silence that had ruled Willow Bend began to crumble, replaced by something more human. Pritchard gathered her reins, jaw tight. "Your gallantry may win you sympathy, Mr. Vance, but it won't change what people think." Gareth didn't flinch. "Then let them think. While they're thinking, we'll be living." He turned away before she could reply. Later that morning, the crowd helped patch what the fire had taken. Silas and his men replaced beams. Martha Tisdale reforged the iron hinges for the door. And even the town blacksmith came with fresh nails. Clara watched them work, her throat tight. She'd expected pity, but what she saw instead was respect silent, heavy, real. When the sun climbed high, she found Gareth by the creek, washing the ash from his arms. The water shimmered bronze, carrying bits of charred grass downstream. For a long moment, she just watched him, the broad set of his shoulders, the scar near his temple, the way he still moved carefully, as if the world might break under his hands. "You shouldn't have done that," she said at last. He looked up. "Which part? Standing against them like that?" "You'll lose standing. Friends? Didn't have many to lose. You'll make enemies." He shrugged. "Already did." She came closer, kneeling at the bank. "Why? You could have stayed out of it. You almost did." Gareth didn't answer immediately. He ran a hand through his wet hair, then faced her fully. "I spent 2 years pretending the world ended with my wife. Thought grief was loyalty. But all it ever did was turn me into a ghost." His voice softened. "Then I saw you, out here, fighting to live when no one gave you permission. You made me remember what breathing felt like." Clara blinked, the words catching her off guard. "I didn't save you." "Gareth, I know." He smiled faintly. "You didn't need to." They sat together in silence, the water murmuring beside them. For the first time since Ben's death, Clara didn't feel the weight of proving anything. Her name was clear. Her land was safe. And yet, the ache in her chest remained an emptiness shaped like something unfinished. "About last night," she began. "When the fire hit, I was scared. Not of the flames, of losing what I'd built before I'd even finished it." She looked toward the cabin, smoke still curling from the roof. "I thought strength meant never needing help, but maybe it means letting someone hold the other end of the beam." He nodded slowly. "Then I'll keep holding it." A smile ghosted across her lips. "Careful. You're starting to sound like a partner." "I'm fine with that." They watched the creek for a while, the surface glinting with sunlight and soot. Then Clara said softly, "Mary Ellen, your wife, would she forgive you for being here?" He took a long breath. "She would have hated seeing me fade away. She used to say the worst sin a man could commit was wasting time that others would have died for." His gaze met hers. "I think she'd want me to keep living. And I think she'd like you." Clara's throat tightened. "Then I'll try to deserve that." The afternoon heat settled over them, quiet but not heavy. From the distance came the sounds of hammering and laughter, the town rebuilding what had nearly been lost. When they walked back toward the cabin, the workers were finishing the new porch. Silas leaned on his shovel and grinned. Not bad for a place folks said would never stand. Clara ran her hand along the beam, feeling its solid weight. It stands, she said, because people finally decided to build something instead of tearing it down. Gareth stood beside her, fingers brushing hers. And because you didn't give up. She turned to him then, sunlight spilling through her hair, her voice barely above a whisper. Neither did you. For a long moment they just stood there, surrounded by noise and life and the smell of fresh-cut wood. The valley had burned and survived. So had they, as the day waned. Clara looked toward the distant hills, smoke lifting into blue sky. When the next storm comes, she murmured, we'll be ready. Gareth nodded, eyes warm. We already are. 2 weeks later, the valley looked almost peaceful again. The charred slopes had faded to dark gold under new grass, and the air smelled of pine resin and summer dust. From a distance, Hollis Creek no longer looked like the edge of nowhere. It looked like the start of something. Clara stood in front of the finished cabin, hammer still in hand though the work was done. A porch wrapped around the front, shaded by beams Gareth had planed smooth himself. Curtains fluttered behind the windows. The smell of fresh-cut cedar lingered in every board. She took a long breath, steadying herself. Because it wasn't just a house anymore, it was proof. Down the road, wagons approached, carrying half the town. Silas Boone came first with a grin and a crate of nails for next time. Martha Tisdale brought a small iron latch she'd forged herself. Even Deputy Frank McCall arrived with a bottle of cider and his quiet congratulations. The people who'd once whispered now stepped forward, offering help, laughter, and hesitant words of respect. Clara didn't give a speech. She didn't need to. She simply nodded, thanked them, and watched as they lingered on her porch, drinking, talking, letting the dust of old judgment settle into something like acceptance. Inside, Gareth worked on hanging the final door hinge. His shirt was rolled to the elbows, arms dark from sun and labor. When he straightened, the doorway framed him in warm light, less like a man stepping through wood and more like someone crossing from one life to another. He looked around the room, the table they'd built together. The chairs Silas had sanded smooth, the clay pitcher Clara had shaped with her own hands. You built this faster than I thought possible, he said, smiling. Clara glanced toward the window. You keep showing up, and I keep finishing things. Maybe that's how it works. Maybe, he said softly. Evening came slow and golden. When the others left, the valley fell quiet except for the creek whispering through stones. The cabin glowed with lantern light, the smell of coffee mingling with wood smoke. Gareth stepped onto the porch, wiping his hands on a rag. Clara followed, 2 mugs in hand. She passed him one, then leaned against the post beside him. Hard to believe it's the same valley, she said. He looked out over the land, where wildflowers had begun to push through the blackened earth. Fires change things, but sometimes they burn away what needs burning. Clara sipped her coffee, the heat grounding her. When I started this cabin, I thought I was proving something to the town, maybe even to Ben, but it was never about them. She glanced at him. It was about staying when every reason said to leave. He met her eyes, steady and unguarded. That's the bravest kind of staying. They stood in silence for a long time. The night deepened, stars bright as nails hammered into velvet. Somewhere, an owl called. Gareth set his mug down and said quietly, I still don't know what comes next. I only know that I'd rather build it with you. Clara's lips curved, soft and sure. Then you'd better learn how to notch timber properly. The next wall's higher. He chuckled, low and real, then reached out. She took his hand without hesitation. The warmth between them felt steady, earned, not fragile like hope, but rooted like trust. A breeze stirred through the cottonwoods, carrying the smell of rain from the distant hills. Clara tilted her head back, letting the first drops fall against her face. "You feel that rain promise?" she murmured. When the storm finally came, it wasn't fierce like before, just a soft, steady downpour that soaked the porch and darkened the new roof. They stayed under the eaves, watching the water dance across the earth that had almost killed them both. Gareth squeezed her hand. "You ever regret it the hard way?" Clara smiled through the rain. "Every good thing worth having comes the hard way." He looked at her then, not as a man haunted by what he'd lost, but as one who'd finally chosen what to keep. He leaned in, kissed her softly, the rain hissing against the roof like applause. When they broke apart, laughter rose between them, quiet, free, alive. The desert smelled of renewal. Smoke curled gently from the chimney. And out beyond the porch, tiny blooms of yellow wildflowers had already begun to push through the black soil. Tomorrow there would be chores, fences to mend, talk in town. But tonight, there was only this: a cabin that had survived the fire, a woman who refused to break, and a man who'd learned that courage could be gentle. Over the valley, thunder rolled once, distant and low, a benediction more than a threat. And from that night on, folks in Willow Bend stopped calling it Hollis Creek. They called it Second Chance Hollow, for the woman who built her home one log at a time, and the man who remembered how to live. Out here, in the Wild West, not every victory is written in gunfire. Some are carved quietly in trust, in mercy, in the courage to start again. If Clara and Gareth's story reminded you that strength and kindness can live in the same heart, stay with us. Every week we bring you tales born from dust, love, and second chances, stories that prove even in the hardest lands, hope still finds a way to bloom. Like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next one. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight?